Hi, in this video we're going to be looking at applying a box shadow to a rectangular or square element on our page, but we're going to be creating a box shadow like this one here that renders inside the element and has a slight curve to it. And the way we're going to do this is by using the before and after pseudo selectors, which I'm going to explain fully if that's something that is new to you. So let's look at some code for this. In terms of markup, all we'll need is this basic HTML template where we're linking to a style sheet. And we'll need, inside our body tags, we'll need a div, which is going to be what we style up. That's going to be the box, and that's where we're going to apply the shadow. So I'm going to give that a class of shadow 4, and then we're going to target that in our CSS. So let's move over to some styles. The first thing I'm going to do is give the body a background, and it's going to have a background color, which is going to be #DDD, which is a light grey. And then I'm going to remove some default margin on the page. Then I'm going to start styling the div itself. I'm going to give it a background color of white, which is #FFF. I'm going to give it a width of 400 pixels, a height of 200 pixels, some padding, some margin, and I'm going to float it left. So if I look at the page now, I have my box without any shadow. So let's start looking at what we need to do for the shadow. The first thing I'm going to do is select the element with shadow 4 as the class, and I'm going to position it relative. And the reason I'm going to give it a position which is relative is so that I can position the pseudo elements in relation to the element with class shadow 4. So you'll see that coming into play a little later on. And then I'm going to apply an overflow hidden. And the overflow hidden means that we're only going to see the blur on the shadow of the pseudo element and not actually the pseudo element's main box shadow, which again I'll explain that in more detail later on. So the next stage is to make the pseudo element itself. So the way to make a pseudo element is to select create a selector for the element that we want to add the pseudo element to, and then do a colon before or after. And in this case we're using ... before, and colon before basically creates an element which is going to be the first child of the targeted element, so of shadow 4. And I'm going to type in the mandatory field, which is content, and I'm just going to give it no content because we don't want any content in there, we just want to create a box shadow. And then I'm going to position it absolute and give it a width which is 96% of its parent element. I'm going to move it up, I'm going to give it a height, I'm going to give it a height of 15 pixels, and then I'm going to move it up 15 pixels so that we won't see it because of the overflow hidden. And I'm also going to move it slightly to the left, so let's give it 2% there. And finally I'm going to apply a box shadow to it, which is going to be 0, 0, 39 pixels, and I'm going to give it a color of RGBA 0, 0, 0, 0.8. So let's see what we get with that. There we are, we have a nice shadow at the top of the page, which looks slightly curved, but we're going to make it even more curved. And as I mentioned earlier, by applying the overflow hidden to the shadow 4 container, we only see the blur radius of the box shadow on our pseudo element. So if I was to remove that, you can see that this is the shadow itself, and this is the blur of the shadow. So let's look at the shadow, and if I was to reduce the blur radius, you can see the blur disappears, and if I increase it we get a bigger and bigger blur. So that is how that works. So let's set it back to what it was and refresh the page, and you can see that's disappeared. Now the final thing to do is add shadow to the bottom of the box as well, and the way we do that is basically use all the same styles but make a an after pseudo element, which is going to be the last child of the shadow 4 element. And the final thing we need to do is just change the word top to bottom so that we move it below the shadow. And then let's go back to the page, refresh, and there we are, we have our box shadow. One more thing we can do to make this look even better is provide a border radius to make the shadows, to make the box shadow slightly elliptical rather than a circle. And the way we do this is by giving it 2 values. The first one is the horizontal radius, and then the second one is the vertical radius. So, and it's important to separate them with a slash like this, and then border radius knows that we're providing it with values that are going to be treated to create an ellipse. So let's copy that and put it in the after selector as well. Just format that, save this, go back to our page and refresh, and you can see it's slightly more curved there, just applying a finishing touch.